Real quick, before we get into the show, I wanted to share a new service called Getita that Ken and I have been using that has made us over $10,000 in Amazon reimbursements. The service requires no monthly subscription, and Getita collects a small percentage of the money they recover for you. It takes less than 5 minutes to set up and works on all Amazon marketplaces. Go to Getita.com, Getida, and enter promo code FTM400. That's FTM for Firing the Man 400 to get your first $400 in reimbursements commission free. How much money does Amazon owe you?
What people really see, what they remember is call it the past 12 years, since 2008, and the stock has done nothing but, up and to the right, go, go, go. People don't remember is the previous 8 years to that, right? Really from 2000 to 2008, the stock was flat. Put other mechanisms in place to try to avoid your organization structure to get important projects done, because otherwise your org structure is slowing you down. It's working against you versus working for you, right? Optimize for the enterprise, not for specific departments, specific sub P&Ls, or specific jobs and titles. Understanding when to have patience and kind of when not to have patience, you have to have a certain internal clock or mechanism or rubric for how you evaluate, how to just when things are a good idea, they just take time to develop.
Welcome everyone to the Firing the Man podcast, a show for anyone who wants to be their own boss. If you sit in a cubicle every day and know you are capable of more, then join us. This show will help you build a business and grow your passive income streams in just a few short hours per day. And now your hosts, serial entrepreneurs David Schomer and Ken Wilson.
Welcome, everyone, to the Firing the Man podcast. On today's episode, we are joined by John Rossman. John is the author of The Amazon Way, a book series which is based on his experiences servicing as the Director of Enterprise Services while at Amazon.com. Since leaving Amazon, John founded Rossman Partners, which helps businesses grow and scale in most industry verticals on digital strategy, operations, and culture. Welcome to the show, John.
Dave, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let's start out with, a little bit about your story and what led you to writing the book series, The Amazon Way.
Right. So as you mentioned, I was at Amazon. It was a long time ago. So I was there from early 2002 through late 2005. I had two primary roles there. I was the director of merchant integration in 2002, played a key role in launching the marketplace business, which everybody in this ecosystem understands what that is really well. And then I also ran enterprise services. So I had responsibility for Toys R Us, Target.com, a bunch of other brands where we ran their branded website for them. I left in late 2005. I was a partner at a consulting firm for 12 years. About 5 years after I left Amazon, one of my clients at the Gates Foundation, he pulled me aside and he goes, you do a really nice job of kind of taking the little strategies and nuances and mechanisms from Amazon and putting them into our work to help us, think better, innovate a little faster, make decisions, those types of things. And he said, I think you ought to write a book, because while we in the Seattle area see Amazon for what it does and how it does it, I don't think the rest of the world knows that story. So this is 2012. So the smartest thing I did was I talked him into being my partner on the books. And in 2014, we released the first edition of the Amazon Way. We just released the third edition of it less than a year ago. And it's been so much fun because it's not about Amazon. It's always about your business and your culture and your techniques and kind of what you can take from a company like Amazon. And even though it has been a long time since I've been at Amazon, I'm always asking current Amazon people who've recently left, hey, does it still work like this? Do they do, future press releases? Do they think about metrics this way? Do they, talk about things in this manner? And it's exactly the same playbook. And I think that's really the power of kind of their culture, is even though the company has changed, 10,000 times since I've been there, how they go about their work is so consistent. And from my perspective, I think Amazon is the most interesting company of the digital era. And it's not because of what they do, it's because of how they do it. And that's the story I tried to capture in the Amazon way, is how they go about their work so that others can think about those same matters for themselves.
Yeah, very interesting. And John, excellent story. And thanks for seeing the books, by the way. For anybody on the YouTube channel, I'm holding up the Amazon Way here, 3rd edition. It is in my stack of to do right here. So I'm really excited to crack that open and get going on that one. So as you know, our audience is largely based up of Amazon sellers. And so everybody listening here is probably super excited to know, like, what was it like to work at Amazon, especially kind of in the earlier days as the steamroller was going, if you will. And also, looking back at that at the time, did you ever think that it would grow into the juggernaut that it is?
Yeah. So let's go to the Wayback Machine, right? So 2002, 90% of Amazon's business is books, music, video. I believe they had $1 billion in cash or cash equivalent. And holiday 2002 was the first $1 billion quarter for Amazon. So it's a roughly $480 billion revenue organization today. We had our first $1 billion quarter at Amazon in 2002, right? So again, changed 10,000 times since then. It was a super fun place, a super demanding place. And I think those two things still resonate at Amazon today. And it's because you get to be both an operator, an owner, and a long-term developer for a line of business. And they do a really nice job of equipping good leaders to have, kind of within their authority, most of the levers to help make something substantial, whether that's for a customer or an internal customer or a developer or whatever it was. And it was just, we launched with the apparel category in early November 2002. I think we had 35 sellers was our initial set of sellers. We handheld every single one of those brands kind of through the process, because we were both building the marketplace, all the mechanisms that were needed, as well as then trying to get them integrated in parallel. And it was just a miracle, honestly, that it came off. It took a lot of patience even after that launch, right? So it really wasn't until 6 or 7 years later when customers learned that you could come to Amazon to buy, lots more than just books, music, video. We filled in the selection. We launched 14 more categories, and we added 2 killer complementary programs to it, which was Prime and FBA. I don't need to explain what FBA is to this audience. And it just took the market time to develop. And I think that's part of the story, is understanding when to have patience and kind of when not to have patience. You have to have a certain internal clock or mechanism or rubric for how you evaluate, like how to just when things are a good idea, they just take time to develop.
Very nice. And one thing I want to dive into that you mentioned in that response was, and I actually wrote it down here in my paper, you said we worked really hard and we had a lot of fun. And those are two concepts that often don't go together. And so let's talk culture here. What did Amazon do well, and where maybe some areas where they fell short?
Well, I think the things that Amazon does really well is they think big. So that's one of the leadership principles, but they understand the difference between thinking big and betting big, right? And that's a subtlety that especially bigger companies don't always get. And so it's how to start off with a grand vision, but bring it back to okay, but here's the first, whether it's, minimally viable product or first release, whatever your terminology is. And so we built the marketplace with an eye towards being able to have, we talked about having hundreds of thousands of sellers on the platform. We didn't envision millions of sellers on the platform, but we knew we were building it for bigger than 1,000. And because of that, we took the time to do some things that were really important to set the stage for scale later on. And, the fun part was just that everybody had a role in debating a topic. Like Amazon's, one of the things they do well is, they talk about putting the customer at the center. It's everybody's job to know the customer and to lead with data, to lead with insights, right? So things like titles and seniority tend to play less of a role in an environment like that. And that's what, makes it fun. Talent grows in that type of environment, and everybody thinks bigger than just their job and title. As far as like what Amazon gets wrong, it's tough to call this wrong, but they have high standards. And so if you aren't a person who likes to think really hard about something, is willing to be a builder and actually do things versus just kind of managing things around you, if you don't lead with data and good insights, and if you aren't willing to dive deep and understand the customer, you're going to have a tough time there. And I don't think that's wrong. And Amazon just doesn't suffer when it's not the right situation for different employees. And I think that's actually a very healthy thing for culture. Everybody thinks about culture as how do we attract the right talent? I think the other side of that coin is how do we create culture that repels the wrong talent? And I think that's really healthy for everybody to understand. You shouldn't be for everybody. Like, be distinct, understand what sort of people, talent, ethos, culture works for you, and don't be ashamed of that.
One quick add-on question that I have on this topic is, can you talk about the hiring process?
Yeah. So, I had 23 interviews spaced over several months. I don't think that's the typical process. It was really like, it was a strategy assignment. Like, I was helping to figure out like what our third-party platform and strategy was going to be. And, maybe there were some things about me they needed to really figure out over time. But the important mechanism, I'll mention two important mechanisms that they do. So one is they have this role that's called the bar raiser role. And the bar raiser is a person that's not part of the hiring team. And that gives them an independent point of view, right? Like, what typically happens in a hiring team is like, we have a job, we got to get it filled. They have some sense of urgency. Sense of urgency is really important, but sometimes it can lead you to compromise a little bit. So the bar raiser is just kind of a governor, as a independent perspective that helps you avoid hiring mistakes by not being a member of the team, and ask the question, does this person for this job category, raise the bar? And not just being able to do this job today, but could they do other similar things in the vicinity of this talent? So that's one real interesting thing. And then the debrief process and the level of detail that you were expected to write and to bring to a debrief meeting. I really struggled with this. I really like to pay attention in conversations, and I'm a little bit more intuitive in terms of how I interview. And I like to hear what the other person really has to say. Well, Amazon, it was like very directive questions. You were expected to essentially be a court reporter and write down exactly what all your perspectives were. But the debrief meetings were really important. And that part I really bought into, where we would take the extra time, everybody would get together, and we would hear every single one of the interviewers out before we voted, unless it was an obvious kind of non-hire. And I think that process of not just debating the candidates, but to hear, well, how are we evaluating people? How are we evaluating talent? A team learns just through that process. So those are two important things about the Amazon interviewing process.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Another question, I guess on culture, also kind of work environment. So before I fired the man a few years ago, I worked for a handful of companies, anywhere from the Department of Defense, where it's not for profit, and so it's very relaxed, all the way up to Fortune 500 companies. They're for profit and they have to answer to shareholders. And so when I think of Amazon, I think of Amazon as at literally the top 1, 2, or 3 of companies that are raking in the most profit. And so in order to do that, in my mind, there has to be an absolute crushing work environment to produce results. Can you speak to that, and what was your experience?
Well, what's funny, Ken, is for most of Amazon's existence, they were punished for not being profitable, right? They had high growth and high revenue, and at a contribution basis was profitable, but they've just always reinvested those profits back into scaling and growing the business. And a lot of people didn't understand that story of kind of unit profitability, but macro reinvestment and how they operated. But I think we worried much more about the inputs versus the outputs. And the 14th leadership principle at Amazon is about delivering results. And it talks about how we focus more on the inputs than the outputs. The outputs are things like the financial results, right? Like, while those are really important, it's the things you do every day and the strategies you pick and the plans that you make, the inputs, the things you have control of that guides you towards getting those outputs. And you don't always have direct control of those outputs. So worry about your plans, and especially debating and writing out the inputs you're going to have and the risks of those inputs. And if X happens, we do A, and if Y happens, we do B. And so if you think through scenarios better, over time, you're going to accomplish more on the outputs, right? Like I always think about athletes, and everybody wants the championship moments, but not everybody's willing to do the hard work of going to the gym every day in order to develop the opportunity, not the given, the opportunity to have those championship moments. And that's what I think a lot of teams and a lot of people suffer through, is like they just want the results, but they don't understand the everyday planning and execution and persistence and discipline that you have to have in order to achieve that.
Very nice. Very nice. And that's one last question I have is, do you recall about how many hours you were working per week while you were employed there?
It was easily 60 hours a week. And my boys were little guys there. And I ended up running a national and international business. So I ended up, I was traveling quite a bit, and everything. And that came into my decision on why I left Amazon and whatnot. But it was more of an always on mindset versus just the hours. And that's what I remember more, was just like, I was always thinking about, which was cool, and everything, like you were absorbed in it, but it was all absorbing. But yeah, it was, 60, sometimes a bit more than that, but it tended to be, 60 hours a week. So it was plenty.
Okay. All right. No, that makes sense. And yeah, I like that. Moving on, your book talks about customer obsession. And I was reading an excerpt from this morning, actually, and made a mental note that I need to share this with someone from our marketing department. But let's dive into that. How, to our listeners, the third-party sellers, what are some practical ways that they can obsess over their customers to lead to a better outcome?
Yeah, so it's the first of the leadership principles at Amazon. It's the first among equals. It's the most famous for sure, but you have to understand, you can't have just customer obsession and run a great business, right? Like you need to run the right play at the right time and leverage these things correctly. But to me, customer obsession and the way we used it in Amazon was it gave us the permission to go upstream and downstream in the customer experience, well beyond our team, our organization, and our enterprise, in order to understand what the customer expectations were, set great customer expectations, and deliver to those in a highly consistent 3 nines SLA mindset there and everything. And so that's how we took it. And so we were trying to solve systemic problems much bigger and greater than just like the merchant integration team would normally be accountable for. And that mindset of being very curious and trying to put instrumentation in place, meaning metrics in place around the broader customer experience beyond just your product or your service, and then figure out how can I improve it and what can I learn from it. That curiosity is such an important curiosity in any business. For third-party sellers, one of the things I always think about is really trying to understand, and I know there's a lot of great tools and data and technology out there, but it's a game of details, right? Like the product details, the cost details, the availability details, the advertising details. that you have to be super clever at really understanding like the nuances and the little winning details that are going to matter. Like Ken mentioned a really nice one before we started today, which was, we were talking about, hey, write a review for the Amazon way. He was like, yeah, I'll do that. And I'll include lots of juicy little keywords in the customer review. Well, that's a really thoughtful and important detail versus me just asking for a review, right? So those are the winning details that make championships right there.
And the reason I wanted to ask you about that is sometimes as third-party sellers, especially on Amazon, it's challenging to obsess over your customer. And I'll provide an example. I go to a butcher. Typically, I go there every Friday. And typically, he will ask me, hey, how are the ribeyes that I sold you last Friday? And I tell him, and we move on. That's a direct feedback. And outside of reviews, there's not a ton of customer engagement. However, we still know that obsessing over the customer is important. And so that's a little bit of background on the question. And I like your comments about the details, the pricing, the description, the photos, everything there. Anyway, over to you, Ken. Sorry to interrupt the episode. You may have heard Ken and I talking recently about a new tool that we're using for Amazon refunds. Now, I have used other refund tools like this. However, I can tell you in the first 7 days, they scrubbed the back end of my Amazon account going back 18 months and found $5,000 of refunds. And the nice thing about this is it's my money. Amazon made a mistake and they are just auditing my account. The other thing I really like about this tool is there is no monthly fee. They only charge a commission if they are successful in getting you your money. Go to getida.com, Getida, and enter promo code FTM for Firing the Man, FTM400. This is an awesome tool. Can't say enough good things about it. Now, back to the episode.
Yeah, sure. So one more kind of follow-up on the customer obsession is, and the reason I ask this is because I think Amazon is like market leading in this space, and I think that everybody can learn a lot from them. And in our team internally, we're starting to really scratch the surface on the customer journey and kind of mapping that. So, John, at Amazon, did you guys do that? You had mentioned earlier about other departments and kind of cross-functional teams. Now, is that what you were talking about in terms of mapping the customer journey? And
that's exactly right. In my case, my customer was third-party sellers, and so, for example, just to do self-service registration, it took over 20 different kind of systems to be integrated together and a workflow to be created. None of those teams worked for me, but I was accountable for creating a great seller experience, which meant we had to have great self-service seller registration. And so I just operated like, in a really friendly but direct manner, like, yeah, we're all working towards this. I'm leading the charge. Doesn't matter that you're not in my organization or you don't report to me, because we have a common mission that we are trying to drive. And so I got into all the details and all the planning and driving a very hard integration project in a very fast period of time to get registration solved for.
Okay. I like that.
And I think that's one of the little tricks that I think is in the Amazon mindset is job titles, job roles, and organization structures. They serve a purpose, but typically hard problems and hard projects go across the organization. So put other mechanisms in place to try to avoid your organization structure to get important projects done, because otherwise your org structure is slowing you down. It's working against you versus working for you, right? Optimize for the enterprise, not for specific departments, specific sub P&Ls, or specific jobs and titles. So like one of the mechanisms we used was a future press release. And a future press release was just a short, pithy, direct mission statement. Give that to one person and let everybody know, like, hey, relative to this mission, we all work for this person. And that's just a little kind of mechanism and message that, don't let the organization or titles get in the way of doing the right thing for the enterprise and for the customer of that enterprise.
Yeah, I think That is crude. That is a huge piece that I think is missing in a lot of large corporations. At least my experience, David, I think could probably speak to that as well. And I would chalk that up as in one word, as ego. I think ego gets in the way of a lot of breaking down barriers, and I think that's a great point.
Yeah, that and people being scared to be held accountable, right? And transparent accountability. And so I absolutely agree. It is kind of a big company problem, and we've all fired the man here. So let's talk about firing the man.
Absolutely. So this is one question I've really been looking forward to asking you since we booked this podcast. In your advisory practice, I think you have a very unique lens in that you can see likely some common characteristics of companies that are doing really well. And on the flip side, there are probably some characteristics that failing companies or companies that are not performing well have. And so can you touch on that, both the good and the bad?
Yeah, in small companies, especially in kind of this marketplace ecosystem space, I think the two things that I look for are A, is kind of a theory of differentiation. Like, what is it going to be that how you compete? What's your theory or what's your strategy for how you're going to be different and compete? And then the second and complementary one is attention to details, right? And understanding that it's a data game and how they source data, how they gain little insights from it, and then how they systematize the insights out of that. Those, to me, in this space are two really important attributes. And what I typically work with of just quizzing, like, keep refining what your theory of competition is, how you're going to win, and then how are you going to source data, gain insights from it, and use it to refine your system.
Do you have an example of that theory of differentiation? And I don't want to get you edited, so I don't want to get you in trouble on any confidentiality, but
no. I think it's really just like, is it a category advantage that you're going to have? Is it a sourcing advantage that you're going to have? Is it a features advantage that you're going to have? Is it a cost advantage you're going to have? Like, those are all different ways that you can compete, and you can say that you're going to have them all, and I doubt it. And so it's really like, out of those 4 or 5 attributes on how a brand and a product wins any place, this isn't Amazon specific, which of those are you going to be differentiated on, and how are you going to do that? The execution pieces, and how are you going to source data to get to the fine-grained details, which is what this specific ecosystem game is about, in order to differentiate and execute against that.
Okay. What about on the flip side? What are some areas where some common characteristics of the underperforming companies?
Yeah, they think it's going to be easy.
Yeah. Yeah. Agree with that.
And so everything, you can just see at the end of the day, whether it's from a capital standpoint, or just the intensity that they're driving at, or their understanding the details, they just think it's going to be easy. And I've been wrong on this, right? I have seen people who do make it easy and have won big, but I think over the long term, like, it's a very competitive marketplace. The world's a very competitive place, and it typically takes a lot more grit, a lot more patience, a lot more than you typically think it will at the beginning.
Absolutely. And so, John, going along with David's last question, if you were, if someone from our audience was to ask, hey, John, I'm planning to, or I've been selling on Amazon for a while, maybe maybe they're not towards 500K in revenue or $1 million, kind of a smaller third market seller, and they say, hey, I'm planning out the next year or 2 or 3 years of my business. The stuff you just mentioned would be great. Is there any other tips and tricks that you would give them and say to kind of map out these next few years and what to focus on to get the most opportunity?
Yeah. So the third leadership principle at Amazon is invent and simplify. And the simplify piece is really important. So when it comes to building your playbook, how do you create a really simple but really thorough playbook for creating your system so that you can, you're at 500K, you have success. Now it's like, how do we scale that? Well, you scale, you've already gone from 0 to 1. How do you go from 1 to 10? You do that by having a systems approach, a system dynamic understanding of what your playbook is, and being able to put that in place so that your team can gain efficiencies. Yeah,
I really like that. Over to you, David.
We've talked a lot about systems, and I'd like to dive into that just a little bit. And, for example, Ken and I use Asana. That is an online tool that we communicate with our team. We set up workflows. That is kind of our platform to build systems upon. Curious if there are any others, perhaps some that Amazon use. I would imagine they're developed internally, but maybe your clients. What are some platforms that they're building their systems on that achieve that simplicity, that check that box? Because that's one that we struggle with, to be honest with you, is to create simple systems that are easily scalable.
I think you've just given kind of the best example that there is of creating processes, workflows, decision-making metrics and matrices, and then articulating it in some tool that supports that. And at the end of the day, it's about writing out that playbook and then talking about it deliberately as a team and having some simple applications that help enable that capability. I can't speak to any others. I know that there's a ton in, kind of the data aggregation game, and there's so many sources of data. And how do you put that combined together to draw actual insights out of it? So I think that the analytics platforms that help third-party sellers win are really, really important and are going to grow in importance. And I think it's going to be hard to be sole sourced in that. And so my guess is that it really is about creating different types of data coming in and having your own proprietary, data lake and analytics and machine learning capabilities to draw the insights out of that.
Yeah, interesting. And John, anything else we want to get into before we pivot into the fire round?
Yes.
Well, I think an important aspect of Amazon is, what people really see, what they remember is call it the past 12 years, since 2008, and the stock has done nothing but, up and to the right, go, go, go. People don't remember is the previous 8 years to that, right? Really from 2000 to 2008, the stock was flat. The marketplace business that I launched in 2002, it was the third iteration of a marketplace business. It was a huge risk. There was internal and external voices that were saying we shouldn't do this. We can't afford to do this. We're not going to succeed at it. And, one of Bezos' quotes is, be fixed on vision, but flexible on approach. And I think that mindset of understanding, try to discern, is the concept bad? And therefore I should switch concepts, or was the concept right, but in some way my execution of it needs refinement? And if you can separate those two concepts of strategy versus execution and understanding, sometimes it takes even the champions multiple tries to get it right, I think that'll help you get through kind of the tough times. And if you can operate the same way with the same leadership principles, mindset, systems, and mechanisms when things aren't going great, then those things are in place when the business really goes off, and that's when it becomes a lot more fun. But operate in the same way, whether it's good times or bad times.
I really like that perspective. I really like that. One last thing before we get into the fire round, can you talk about Rossman Partners and what type of clients that you work with?
Yeah, so Rossman Partners is my boutique firm, and I work with clients on kind of competing in the digital era and help them with strategies, cultures, leadership, mechanisms, and operations. My ideal customer, honestly, is a big enterprise where you suffer from a lot of the bureaucracy and lack of clear thinking and organizational silos that we've talked about a lot. I do work with some entrepreneurs and small companies in a advisor capacity, and I help them think through the topics that we're talking about today.
Very nice.
Excellent. Very cool. All right, John, are you, David, anything else?
Nope.
All right, John, are you ready for the fire round?
I think I am.
It's very simple. What is your favorite book?
So I don't know if I have a favorite book, or the premise of the question kind of throws me, but a recent book that I read that I really liked and took a lot from is called The Founders, the story of PayPal and the entrepreneurs who shaped Silicon Valley. So it's so many people, they talk about the PayPal mafia, right? You've got Elon Musk, you got David Thiel, you got David Sachs, you got Max Levchin, a bunch of other people that all came from that team. But what I took from that story was how hard they had to work and how many times they had to pivot their business. The super smart people that are now famous, like they struggled with so many of the same things we all struggle with. And so I found it to be a really inspiring book about many of the things that we're talking about today. So it's called The Founders.
Excellent book. Yeah. And there's lots of great stories in that book. What are your hobbies?
So, I'm pretty simple, nothing too glamorous. So, I've got a variety of athletic things. I'm a suffering athlete, but I like to swim. I play some squash. I do some other things. Both my boys were athletes through college. And so we spent a couple of decades of just great family adventure doing that. And I like reading. Like that's what I do I like exploring business reading and history reading. I listen to a lot of books and podcasts today. And that's a pretty full life for me.
Awesome. Very cool. What is the one thing that you do not miss about working for the man?
I have completely optimized my life around control and flexibility. And so the thing I don't miss about working for the man is not having control of my schedule. So if I want to take a week off, I can take a week off. It takes some planning. I have to manage all my dependencies and everything, right? There's still demands, but I have a lot more control over my schedule than I ever had when I was working for the man.
All right. Yeah, that's one of our top answers. What do you think sets apart successful e-commerce entrepreneurs from those who give up, fail, or never get started?
No simple answer to that. We've talked about 10 or 12 things today relative to that, but so oftentimes it's just getting started is, the first step is just the daunting one. And so I know of so many people, whether it's in writing a book or starting a business, who just don't know how or find it in themselves to take the first step and put a plan together and then just work it every single day.
Yeah, excellent. Really appreciate you taking the time today to come on the show and share your experience and your knowledge with the audience. Really appreciate it.
Well, it was great getting to meet both of you, and thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. John, if someone wants to connect with you, what is the best way?
Well, LinkedIn is the simplest way, John Rossman. I have a newsletter. It's free. It's called the Digital Leader Newsletter. You can get it at Substack. You can just Google the Digital Leader Newsletter. And, I have a website, rossmanpartners.com, but, LinkedIn, honestly, is probably a little bit easier.
Very nice. And to all the listeners, go out. We're going to post a link to this in the show notes, but go out and buy The Amazon Way. And once you read it, leave a keyword loaded review for our friend John. John, really appreciate you being on the Firing the Man podcast and looking forward to staying in touch.
It's always fun to talk to the Amazon marketplace ecosystem. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to today's Firing the Man podcast. If you like this episode, head on over to firingtheman.com and check out our resource library for exclusive Firing the Man discounts on popular e-commerce subscription services. That is firingtheman.com/resource. You can also find a comprehensive library of over 50 books that Ken and I have read in the last few years that have made a meaningful impact on our business. For that, head on over to www.firingtheman.com/library. Lastly, check us out on social media at Firing the Man and on YouTube at Firing the Man for exclusive content. This is David Schomer.
And Ken Wilson.
We're out. Before you go, we wanted to share a new service that Ken and I have been using called Getita that has made us over $10,000 in Amazon reimbursements. The service requires no monthly subscription, and Getita collects a small percentage of the money they recover for you. It takes less than 5 minutes to set up and works on all Amazon marketplaces. Go to Getita.com, Getida.com, and enter promo code FTM400. That's FTM for Firing the Man 400 to get your first $400 in reimbursements commission free. How much money does Amazon owe you?